You mentioned that you're wanting to have a VBAC or a vaginal birth after a C-section and you're concerned it won't happen, and you asked a good question about the baby dropping. Does that make a difference? What can you do to help the baby drop? And the baby descending into the pelvis is called lightening. And you may or may not notice this happen. Sometimes other people notice it for us. If we haven't seen them for a couple of weeks, they're like, oh, you dropped. And they just see that your belly's a little bit lower than it used to be. Sometimes mothers notice this happen as they feel like suddenly they can finally take a deep breath, but it's not always a great trade-off because then you feel like you've got a bowling ball between your legs. Really, the best indication of how low your baby is in your pelvis is to have a cervical exam. And your doctor can tell you at what station, that's the medical term we use, your baby is at in your pelvis. But it's not really something to be too concerned about because first-time mothers often have their babies drop weeks before they go into labor. And if you've already had a baby before, then this process might happen just hours or days before you deliver. It's not necessarily an indication that something's going to happen, and it's not necessarily that something that helps once you do start to go into labor until you get later on into the process. The lower the baby's head is later in the process, the stronger your contractions will be. So, again, once you go into labor and start having regular contractions, it matters a little bit more. Now, you asked a good question about whether or not you're going to be successful at having a VBAC, and your chances are about 60 to 80%, meaning 6 to 8 out of 10 women who attempt a VBAC are actually successful and deliver vaginally. So your chances are great. Now, that's just having a successful vaginal delivery. When it comes to the biggest risk of a VBAC, which is a uterine rupture, the chances of that happening are only 1%. It's very similar to if I were to make an incision down my bicep and I started lifting heavy weight. The incision could split open, and that's exactly what can happen to your uterus during labor when you're attempting a VBAC. So your doctor is going to watch you very closely, and this is probably also why they've told you need to go into spontaneous labor in order to attempt a VBAC at all. So that's probably where your question came from. We don't want to induce women who are attempting a VBAC because it does increase their chances of uterine rupture. That's not to say, though, that we can't break your water during labor and we can't use Pitocin. It's just used very judiciously. We gradually move you up on Pitocin slower than we would for someone who hasn't had a VBAC. And we watch your contraction strength more closely to make sure that your uterus isn't working too hard, which might increase your chances of rupture. So again, it's all circumstantial. There's so many different things that can affect your ability to have a successful VBAC or not. One thing to consider is that if things aren't progressing well, your baby's not tolerating labor, or there's other signs of complication, we're not as likely to let you continue laboring if you're a VBAC. We're more likely to do a C-section. So talk with your doctor if you have more questions about it, and they can give you more information based on their knowledge of your circumstances. But again, chances are great that it will work out for you. I hope the very best, and congratulations ahead of time on the delivery of your baby. If you have any other questions for me in the future, feel free to ask them on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Intermountain Moms, and recommend us to your friends and family too.